And we are live. This is JWC Livestream. JWC Livestream. We are dealing with sublimated poesy. This is sublimated poesy with David and Ricky. I am Ricky. Oh, hi everyone. And this is David Anderson, the poet. David, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. And so we are creative obsessors. We do a lot of writing, we make a lot of products, but more so we communicate with the muse. We communicate with the creative force that lives in unconsciousness. We're poets, so we can say big things like this and appear just to be a little kooky, but in this particular case, it's not about that. With poets, you expect them to talk like that. You expect them to think about the deeper things. Some of them do, some of them don't, right? But in this particular case, we write. We do a lot of writing. And today's show, Sublimated Poesy, it focuses on the poetry aspect. I have an idea for a poem. I have to write it. I can't ignore it. If I wasn't so busy today, I would have threw it down. It's going to be called God Talk to Me in the Driveway. And it's got some images in it floating around in it that I can't say no to. But I think what's important now is we focus on introductions before we get away. I mean, I'm in a real spacey place today as far as stuff. I did a lot of fun creative stuff I'm interested in talking about in a minute. David, how have you been and how's your creative life going, man?
It's going well. I'm working on Athenaeum, and I'm also writing poetry.
Yes, well, poetry is a wonderful thing. You know, writing poetry is a wonderful thing to refine your language, increase your descriptive power. And as we're talking about today, today's focus is confessional poetry, which is what I used to do it for. I started writing poetry as therapy to help me break down certain circumstances, especially feelings of powerlessness, inadequacy, you know, any of those things. What stressed me out, if there was imagery that was intrusive. And that's what poetry can do. Just the act of it alone will take you out of the present moment and put you into a timeless state, a state of transcendence. And once you're there, you can observe things from a totally different standpoint than you normally would. I have been working on, I wrote the book blurb for Athenaeum, which is David and I's pirate fantasy book that we're writing. So I wrote a blurb for that. I wrote a book blurb for a friend and business partner of mine for a thing he's working on, which is coming along great. I'm writing, I finished Exsanguinator, and I'm very, very pleased with how it came out. It's brutal, it's violent, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on in there symbolically. And it seems to me that I feel, my satisfaction that I feel in it derives from how enjoyable it was to write, but also it's the same thing with the poetry, like I just mentioned. Like when I write novels, I'm writing therapeutically. I acted like, oh, I did that with poetry. It's like I still do that. I feel like everything I do has a therapeutic lean, it has a spiritual lean, and it's creativity. That's the creativity is the most important thing because that's why it spreads into that profundity. I'm not saying it's profound. I'm saying it's impactful for me. That's why I do it. It helps cycle my brain chemistry, and I mean that's the road to dopamine, that episodic satisfaction. So it's the same thing pertaining to books. Writing chapters is like writing a poem. But I got to write that poem. I got to get back to my essays. It's about time to edit Exsanguinator, which I'm working on. Well, I haven't really started it yet. Because I was outlining the next book. So that's the thing about outlining the next book as opposed to editing. We all have our favorite things that we like to do. I like just composing stuff raw. Editing can be fun, like when you work with someone collaboratively, but editing alone is not my cup of tea, we'll say. But I got to get back to essays. I got to get back to I got to write that poem. And I got to get the book edited. I got a deadline about 2 weeks before the cover artist and the editor, we're going to start talking about putting it up. So all that stuff's been a blast. Yeah, and I wrote the book blurb for Exsanguinator also. So a lot of blurbing this weekend. We might have to have another blurb show. Yeah, so that is the creative check-in. That's the angle. And I'm really thrilled with it. Enjoying it. So there's nothing like, I mean, I was busy with work too, but there's nothing like getting to your creative obsession and throwing down chapters. Nothing like it. And so today's poem is by Anne Sexton. And if you look up the definition of confessional poetry, she is one of the names that is listed. Now, I've heard of her as I was listening to various things. I heard of her. And like I used to have a habit of listening to documentaries about poets and authors, you know, because it's like it was very inspirational, and her name was just casually dropped in excellence. Like someone was talking about it and they were like, wow, you know. So let's see. This is Anne Sexton's poem, A Curse Against Elegies. Oh, love, why do we argue like this? I'm tired of all your pious talk. Also, I am tired of all the dead. They refuse to listen, so leave them alone. Take your foot out of the graveyard. They are busy being dead. Everyone was always to blame. The last empty fifth of booze, the rusty nails and chicken feathers that stuck in the mud on the back doorstep, the worms that lived under the cat's ear, and the thin-lipped preacher who refused to call except once on a flea-ridden day when he came scuffing in through the yard, looking for a scapegoat. I hid in the kitchen under the rag bag. I refuse to remember the dead, and the dead are bored with the whole thing. But you go ahead. Go on back down into the graveyard. Lie down where you think their faces are. Talk back to your old bad dreams. Yeah, so that's a pretty one. When I read poetry like this, and this may make me a dullard or something in the eyes of people, but so I read the heck out of beat poetry. The beats, Ginsberg, Corso, Calrac, and this confessional stuff, it reminds me of beat poetry, the way that beat poetry was, the agony that was. Because there is an agony. Agony is a trial, you know? So you're going through something and you're letting the poetry rip it out of you. Apparently that's a confessional poetry thing. But strangely enough, I've written that way my whole life. A lot of my poetry feels that way. So it's, oh, love, why do we argue like this? So she's lamenting an argument. I'm tired of all your pious talk. And she's tired of the dead. So religiosity, she don't care for that. And the dead or change or something they're not letting go of, you know? Like there's tombstones, they keep visiting the past, visiting what's departed, or nourishing the bereavement, like trying to process grief. Who knows? Don't know enough about her. They refuse to listen, so leave them alone. Take your foot out of the graveyard. They are busy being dead. So don't live among the dead. Let the dead bury the dead. To go scriptural about it. Everyone was always to blame. The last empty fifth of booze, rusty nails, chicken feathers stuck in the mud on the back doorstep, and hideously the worms that lived under the cat's ear. So everyone was always to blame. So he was griping and projecting negativity. And the thin-lipped preacher refused to call except once on a flea-ridden day when he came scuffing in the yard looking for a scapegoat. And it says, I hid in the kitchen under the rag bag. So it's like he's unwanted, loping around and looking for a scapegoat. That means someone to take the blame, someone to take the expiation and flee into the desert, into the wilderness. I refuse to remember the dead, and the dead are bored with the whole thing. So the dead don't even care that she doesn't care about the dead. That's how uncaring the dead are. But you go ahead, go on back down in the graveyard. Lie down where you think their faces are. Talk back to your old bad dreams. So there's something that he's not letting go of, it would seem, and she can't let go that he's not letting go of it, which makes sense to me. Quite a beautiful poem. Beautiful? How could you say beautiful? Well, it's because of what's being expressed. A lot of people keep their emotions bottled up. A lot of them make emotions a trap. They put a carrot on a stick in a snare, or, you know, this is an expression of the emotions being cycled. That's the essence of confessional poetry, and what I was referring to at the beginning of the show concerning writing for therapy. If you write for a therapeutic purpose, it helps you process emotions because you're creating. When you create a poem, you're inspired. Inspiration comes from your unconsciousness. Like she was talking about your old bad dreams, you know. So he don't sleep well at night. Maybe he keeps her up. Maybe he's wailing, carrying on, but he's drinking, he's griping. So whatever it is, he ain't happy with it, right? So that's the key, is to process your happiness, process your unhappiness. because they're the same thing. If you bottle your emotions and you let stuff get heavy with hate, or you can't, integrate change or whatever it is, and not everyone can. Not everyone is Captain America running around. Sometimes people just have to deal with stuff. Life gets heavy, and there's a huge load dumped on them, and it's like, what do you do? Well, get solitary, create, write it down, read it, express it, get good at it, get good at writing, get good at throwing poetry down, get good at expressing your emotions, letting them out, ventilating. Because if you don't, there's lots of things to do. I'm not an authority. I'm an authority on writing and poetry, but I'm not a recognized authority. Read my books. Read my books. Go buy my books. If you dig my books, you could tell if I'm a writer then, if you dig my books. And then maybe you could have time for what I'm saying. A lot of people don't have the time of day for anything anybody's saying. That's how it is today. That's one of our problems. So if you don't have any knowledge of me, then go read my books, because that's more important than anything for determining if I have something to talk about here. So let's find out who Anne Sexton is. You got to separate the poem from the poet. But in this case, we're going to try to fuse them. Anne Sexton, born Anne Gray Harvey, was an American poet known for her highly personal confessional verse. And there it is again, confessional poetry, confessional verse. She won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1967 for her book, Live or Die. Her poetry details her long battle with bipolar disorder, suicidal tendencies, and intimate details from her private life, including relationships with her husband and children, whom it was later alleged she physically and sexually assaulted. Wow. That's alleged. So there's some turmoil there. That puts things together a little bit as far as the poem is concerned. She had two older sisters, Jane Elizabeth, and Jealous, couldn't be, Blanche Digny Taylor. She spent most of her childhood in Boston. In 1945, she enrolled in Roger Hall Boarding School in Lower Massachusetts, later spending a year in Garland School. For a time, she modeled for Boston Heart Agency. She married Alfred Muller Sexton, and they remained together until 1973. She had her first child in 1953. Her second child was born 2 years later. Sexton suffered from severe bipolar disorder for much of her life. Her first manic episode taking place in 1954 after a second episode in 1955. She met Dr. Martin Orne, who became her long-term therapist at the Glenside Hospital. It was he who encouraged her to write poetry. The first poetry workshop she attended was led by John Holmes. Sexton felt great trepidation about registering for the class, asking a friend to make the phone call and accompany her to the first session. So the poor thing must have been terribly anxietized. She found acclaim with her poems. A number were accepted by New Yorker, Harper Magazine, and Saturday Review. At the time, that's a powerful thing. Sexton later studied with Robert Lowell at Boston University alongside poet Sylvia Plath, George Starbuck. Sexton later paid homage to her friendship with Plath in the 1963 poem Sylvia's Death. Her first volume of poetry, To Bedlam and Partway Back, was published in 1960. and included the poem Her Kind, which uses the persecution of witches as an analogy for the oppression of women in a patriarchal society. That's where they got that from. Sexton's poetic career was encouraged by her mentor, W.D. Snodgrass, whom she met at the Antioch Writers' Conference in 1957. His poem, Heart's Needle, proved inspirational for her in its theme of separation from his 3-year-old daughter. Sexton first read the poem at a time when her own young daughter was living with her mother-in-law. She in turn wrote The Double Image, a poem which explores the multi-generational relationship between mother and daughter. Sexton began writing letters to Snodgrass and they became friends. While working with John Holmes, Sexton encountered Maxine Kuhlman. They became good friends and remained so for the rest of Sexton's life. Kuhlman and Sexton rigorously critiqued each other's work and wrote 4 children's books together. In the late 1960s, the manic elements of Sexton's illness began to affect her career, though she still wrote and published work and gave readings of her poetry. They must be recorded. That's something on YouTube, isn't it, folks? I want to hear her read her poetry. I hope it's there. Why wouldn't it be, right? She collaborated with musicians, forming a jazz rock group called Her Kind that added music to her poetry. Very beat. Her play Mercy Street, starring Maureen Seldes, was produced in 1969. After several years of revision, Sexton also collaborated with the artist Barbara Swan, who illustrated several of her books. So now we have an idea of this Anne Sexton. Rocky marriage, bipolar disorder, allegations of this and that, stormy. And also you could see socially anxietized. When she wanted to go to school, she needed a friend to come and hold her hand. So as tumultuous as things were, she herself was, it seems, somewhat on the shy side or anxietized to the point of where there's no difference. And her doctor encouraged her to write poetry. He must have done that because he thought it would be good for her. So it goes back to the beginning. This is the basis of the wisdom when it comes to writing poetry. There's lots of reasons to do it, but for me personally, not saying it's got to be this way for you, not saying anything really, but for me, poetry was therapeutic. It helped me express my emotions, let them out, so that they were not bottled. Poetry is a ventilation when it's confessional poetry. So today's wisdom talks about the notion of confessional poetry. David Anderson provided this. Confessional poetry, the origin of the phrase confessional poetry. And Rosenthal, poet critic, coined it in his review of Robert Lowell's life studies in The Nation, the book which contained poems that unsparingly detailed Lowell's acceptance of marital strife, generational struggle, and mental illness. Generational struggle. That's a good one. Marking a dramatic turn in his career, the personnel had always been fodder for poetry, but Lowell Rosenthal claimed removes the mask that previous poets had worn when writing about their own lives. So confessional poetry takes a mask off. It takes a corporate mask off. The corporate mask is, well, that doesn't sound good. Anything where you go, not everything's good. No, sometimes things aren't good. That's what the truth means. So when you write confessional poetry, you're taking a mask off. You're revealing yourself. You're making yourself vulnerable, because you have to do that to take the lid off the bottle and vent, get that bad genie out of there. or whatever it is you're bottling up. So that's an interesting thing right there. Removes the mask. Can't say no to that. I mean, that's what you do in a journal. That's why if you take a little kid's journal and you threaten them with it, they flip out, because there's personal, confessional things in there. So this is where poetry meets journalizing, journalism, journalization, however you want to call it. To journalize the soul, to be a journalist of the soul. So here's some elements of confessional poetry. The poet uses experiences from their personal life as inspiration. You see, that's why people, oh, I don't know what to write about. All you have to do is think about what happened to you for just 2 seconds in that day. The poet is the voice addressing the subject, namely the poet. So you are your own voice. You're echoing, sometimes responding, sometimes the echo responds, sometimes it's the echo that's talking. Don't forget about that possibility. When you're a poet, it is a possibility. When you're anybody that pays attention to your own consciousness, it's the echo talking, it's not the voice. Common subjects are personal struggles with mental illness and other life-changing events that leave the poet transformed. Life-changing events. Is unwelcome. That's not news. Ricky, you say, tell me what else is new. But you know, seriously, sometimes there's a change and you just can't deal with it. So write a poem about it. I write whole books about stuff like that, whole novels and poems. It's like, that's a little problem. It's a little issue, but writing a poem could be as satisfying as writing a chapter sometimes. Can't underestimate it. Poetry is vital. We've never been able to write a million words or whatever it is if I didn't write a bunch of poems and learn how to express myself, gain poetic voice fulfillment. That allows me to write confessional material that's therapeutic, that helps me vent my emotions. Lastly, the poetry is metaphorical, biographical, and reflects on the poet's place in society. So it talks about your home, talks about your neighborhood, your local frustrations, your mundane anxieties, pulls that stuff out from where it's stuffed and makes it so you could show it and get it out. If you want to have pride, if you want to vent it, if you want to get it over with, however you want to look at it, that's important. Notable confessional poets: John Berryman, Anne Sexton, which we read today, Sylvia Plath, Robert Lowell, which was referenced, and W.D. Snodgrass, which was also referenced. Confessional poetry's influences on American poetry. It has been observed that confessional poetry has influenced performance poetry and slam poetry readings. And I could say, back in 2004, I put a book out, and a year before, I think in 2003, we did a spoken word album, Machinations of the Cybernetic Phantom God. You can find it on Spreaker.com. That's where my stuff is. Way back then, I was attending open mics because I used to bring, 5, 6 books of mine along, trying to peddle them. It's always been the name of the game, trying to sell the books. Writing books is fun. Publishing books is amazing. I can't recommend it enough. But selling books, talking about the books you're selling, reading them, going out, having a poetry adventure, that's where it used to be back in the early aughts. It feels like another life. Feels like 2 or 3 other lives. Put it to you that way. But it's true. When you get up there and you have that mic, there is a confessional nature to what's going on. People want to tell what's frustrating them, what's breaking them down, what they need to express and ventilate from their spirit. And that's why they do that stuff. That's why they go up. If you write poetry, you should read it. You should read it to yourself, and you should go out and read it to other people when it's ready. But you'll know when it's ready. Write 100 poems. And one of them, there'll be something tasty about at least one of 100. Gotta be. If you got a bunch out of 100, that's something else. That means you're on your way to voice fulfillment. And then you go to a mic, an open mic, and you read it. There's power there. It's not some power as in I'm powerful. If you want to feel empowered, that's fine. It's creative power. Creative power, which is sort of, I don't know, mildly paradoxical, I suppose. Creative force brings with it timelessness and what could be called transcendence. Someone in that point in time when they hear you reading, if they identify with it, if it's accessible in any way, they're going to get pulled to a higher place. They're going to get pulled out of temporality. They're going to, go into mind theater or fall into a creative trance. And that's what good poetry does. It's therapy for you, the writer. It's therapy for them, the reader or the audience who hears you read it, because you have a tribal community, not something vicious or whatever, not us versus them tribe. I'm talking about togetherness. I'm talking about an understanding and a comfort that comes with self-expression. Or that's how it used to be. I went to a barber shop. What Matters Most, I think, is the name of the business. If I'm wrong, then someone will have to forgive me. But they had an open mic guy who was reading. He was a spoken word artist, actually. He had a performance. The place was packed. And it brought me back to the old days. It brought me back to 2001. Because it's like they're saying, confessional poetry, it has a measured influence on performance poetry and slam poetry. And performance poetry is what I used to do. Yeah, I used to go and read my verse and stuff and older stuff from my verse, because I wrote 300 poems by that point, and 300 to 500. I mean, I was just writing. But write a poem for yourself. Write a poem for your therapeutic needs. Take care of yourself emotionally. People talk about, I need exercise. I go on walks. I'm a big fella. But you got to exercise your soul too. Where's my soul? Well, I could show you if you want, but that's not the point. Emotionality. I use spiritual terms, forgive me. Your emotionality needs to be exercised. You need to express yourself. You can't sit in a cubicle all day. You can't be in some sort of, take your corporate mask off. Not for hostility or doom. Take it off to show people the truth. Read, and you got to be careful of everything you do. That's why I'm talking about corporate. People, when you write confessional poetry, sometimes you're going to confess things people don't want to hear. You got to be wise. You got to know what it is that you can read and what it is that you can't. Not everything will be welcome. Oh, Ricky, this sounds hard. This sounds complicated. Yeah, well, look, that's what happens when you get creative. It's conscious. It's problem causing consciousness. That's what creativity is. It causes problems. Why do I want to cause problems? Well, sometimes you got to do something like that. I'm not talking about problems that are dangerous problems. I'm sure that's possible too, but that's not why I did it. That's not why I use it. I'm talking about enough to cause the problem to make you vent your emotion, cause it within your own emotionality. People want to avoid problems. And when you avoid emotionality and you avoid your own ventilation of it, that's a problem. That's what gets people white knuckle furious and makes them want to do terrible things, because there's no ventilation of emotionality. There's no self-expression. There's no self-actualization or fulfillment. People sometimes they live unfulfilled lives. So try some poetry. Maybe that'll fulfill things. Maybe it'll get your emotionality stirred. cycle your brain chemistry, change you for the better. That's what it did me. And I wrote a bunch. We're talking to people who are listening, who want to hear some stuff about poetry, and we're especially talking in inspirational terms to people who want to write poetry and be a poet, a published poet, and maybe even beyond that. You get in your own heart space, ventilate your emotionality, write confessional poetry, explore who you are. You learn things right away, and you'll find out if this is your dream. It's got to be your dream to write. That's how it is for me. I dream of transcendence through writing, through print. It's one of my favorite things. So that was Anne Sexton. It was a great poem, and we learned about confessional poetry, and it's something we have to go back to. I'm going to give it more prominence in our analysis. Time flies when you're having fun. So we're at the end section. We've expressed the wisdom. The wisdom is, don't be afraid to be confessional. Don't be afraid to express yourself. Ventilate your soul. When you're seeking and writing the truth like that, you're going to learn a lot. You'll get voice fulfillment, poetic voice fulfillment. That's the thing that we always talk about. Language play leads to it. And that's how you'll eventually be able to write almost anything. And the stuff you love to write will come out like gravy. This has been JWC Livestream. This is Sublimated Poesy with David and Ricky. David had some technical difficulties. He had to bow out. It's a shame we missed him, but this is how it is sometimes. It matters not, because at the end of the day, I'm hoping he watched, but it was he that provided the confessional poetry section, and it really helped out. So we're thankful to him for that. Please go to joeswritersclub.com, check out our author pages and our blogs. Just go over to joeswriters.club, sign up. Go to JWC social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and most importantly, go to our YouTube page, like and subscribe, and please share with your friends. Anybody that's interested in our Monday show content is poetry. Our Tuesday show content is a cycle. Hopefully tomorrow, if everything goes well, we're going to talk about paranormal inspirations, which is we go over a good book for world building. World building? Why world building, Ricky? Well, world building, that's where your characters come from. That's where everything comes from. In my book, in my humble opinion, and that's all it is. And that's the thing you got to remember. JWC can't make you a better writer. You have to do that yourself. But JWC can help make you a different writer. And that might be what you need. You never know. Never underestimate that. Look into the difference. The difference is good. Read more, read tons and tons. Don't ever stop. Thanks a lot for listening, folks. It was a great show, and we'll see you again real soon. You take care. Be creative.